Tonight, for the first time, police video showing what happened inside Gene Hackman's home.
Leah Chavez spent hours looking at the footage and shows us what they saw.
On a bitterly cold afternoon on February 26, 2025, the silence of a sprawling, gated estate on the wind-swept outskirts of Santa Fe, New Mexico, was shattered by a discovery that defied immediate explanation. A security contractor and a maintenance worker, arriving for what should have been a routine visit to the property, peered through the glass of the quiet residence and saw something that stopped them in their tracks. They immediately placed an urgent call to the Santa Fe County Sheriff's Office. When deputies arrived at approximately 1:45 p.m., they braced themselves for what they assumed would be a standard welfare check on an elderly resident, perhaps a slip and fall or a sudden, natural end to a long life. Instead, they stepped into a domestic tragedy that would take weeks to fully comprehend, and would ultimately paint one of the most heartbreaking portraits of isolation, devotion, and tragedy in modern American history. Inside the house, officers discovered two bodies, located in completely different wings of the home, separated by vast stretches of quiet corridors and high-ceilinged rooms. The remains belonged to Hollywood legend Gene Hackman, 95, and his devoted wife of over 3 decades, Betsy Arakawa, 65. The physical state of the scene immediately sent investigators' minds racing in a dozen different directions. There were absolutely no signs of forced entry. The doors were secured, the windows were locked tight, and the perimeter of the estate was entirely undisturbed. Furthermore, there was no evidence of a struggle, and nothing of value had been taken. In a home filled with valuable art, historical memorabilia, and loose cash sitting openly on countertops, not a single item had been touched. The immediate question confronting the deputies was simple but maddening. How do two people, living in a highly secure, locked fortress, die in separate rooms without any obvious signs of physical trauma or external violence? The dry, thin air of Santa Fe, which sits at an elevation of more than 7,000 feet, added a surreal, unsettling layer to the initial investigation. Because of the arid climate and the low humidity, the bodies had not decomposed in the typical fashion. Instead, they had undergone a process of partial mummification, preserving their final postures with an eerie, lifelike stillness. This preservation made it clear that they had been dead for weeks, lying undiscovered while the world outside continued to spin, entirely unaware that the screen icon and his partner had vanished forever. The first instinct of the responding deputies was to check for environmental hazards. They suspected a gas leak, a faulty boiler, or carbon monoxide poisoning, the kind of silent, airborne killers that can quietly claim an entire household, including pets, in a single night. Moving rapidly, deputies through open windows and doors, calling in local fire crews and representatives from the New Mexico Gas Company to sweep the boiler rooms and ventilation systems. Yet, as the gas detectors returned clean readings and the carbon monoxide levels tested negative, every simple, convenient theory began to crumble. The truth was far more complex, hidden in a sequence of events that began weeks prior. To comprehend how such a tragedy could unfold in near total isolation, one must first understand the life Gene Hackman and Betsy Arakawa had built together in the high desert. Hackman was a towering figure in American cinema, an actor of immense, visceral power who had earned 2 Academy Awards and defined a generation of filmmaking with iconic roles in The French Connection, Unforgiven, and The Royal Tenenbaums. Yet, in the early 2000s, at the height of his enduring respect in the industry, Hackman did something almost completely unprecedented for a star of his magnitude. He walked away. He retired from acting, turned his back on Hollywood, and chose to slip quietly into the vast, silent landscapes of New Mexico. He wanted no more red carpets, no more press junkets, and no more public scrutiny. For over 20 years, he lived a life of deliberate, deeply guarded privacy, dedicating his time to painting, writing historical novels, and enjoying the simple pleasure of riding his bicycle through the dusty streets of Santa Fe. Betsy Arakawa was the indispensable anchor of this quiet existence. A classically trained pianist born in Hawaii, Betsy had met Gene in the mid-1980s. Despite the 30-year age gap between them, their bond was exceptionally strong and enduring. As the decades passed and Gene grew older, Betsy's role naturally transitioned from partner to protector. She managed the daily operations of their estate, handled the finances, coordinated medical appointments, ran the errands, and kept the machinery of their private world running smoothly. She was the buffer between Gene and a world that was always eager to pull him back into the public eye. In his final years, Gene required this level of protection more than ever. Though the public remained unaware, the legendary actor was battling advanced Alzheimer's disease. The autopsy would later confirm that the physical structures of his brain had undergone the severe, irreversible changes characteristic of the disease's late stages. This was not a mild form of age-related forgetfulness. It was a profound, progressive cognitive decline that stripped away his ability to reliably interpret his surroundings, recognize emergencies, or make decisions critical to his own survival. In their daily life, Betsy was not just his wife. She was his cognitive compass, the sole caretaker who ensured he was fed, medicated, and safe. They lived alone, choosing not to employ live-in staff or domestic helpers, and they had no interior security cameras that might have alerted family members to an emergency. This absolute self-reliance was their pride and their comfort, but it also meant that their entire survival system rested on a single, fragile point of failure: Betsy. As investigators began the painstaking task of tracing the timeline of the tragedy, they focused their attention first on Betsy, whose actions would provide the key to understanding the initial collapse of the household. By reviewing credit card transactions, security camera footage from local businesses, email correspondence, and digital footprints, detectives were able to piece together a detailed, almost minute-by-minute account of February 11th, 2025. By all accounts, it was a perfectly ordinary winter Tuesday. At approximately 11 a.m., Betsy exchanged a series of casual emails with her massage therapist, scheduling an upcoming appointment. It was a kind of routine, forward-looking communication that suggested she had no inkling of the danger looming over her health. Later that afternoon, she set out to run a series of errands around Santa Fe. Surveillance cameras captured her moving through the aisles of a Sprouts Farmers Market between 3:30 p.m. and 4:15 p.m., carefully selecting groceries for the week ahead. From there, she drove to a nearby CVS pharmacy, checking out at approximately 4:20 p.m. Her final stop of the afternoon was at a local specialty pet food store just before 5 p.m., where she purchased supplies for the animals she loved so deeply. Only a couple of days earlier, on February 9th, Betsy had brought their beloved Kelpie mix, Xena, home from a veterinary hospital. Xena had recently undergone a medical procedure, and because she was recovering, Betsy kept her inside a specialized dog crate in a quiet room, rather than allowing her to roam the house with the couple's other 2 dogs. This detail, though seemingly minor at the time, would later become one of the most heart-wrenching elements of the entire story. At approximately 5:15 p.m., the electronic gate transponder registered Betsy's vehicle entering the private community. She drove up the winding driveway, parked her car, and walked through the front door, bringing the groceries and pet food inside. It was the last time Betsy Arakawa was ever seen alive by the outside world. The true horror of what happened next lies in the medical mystery that began to unfold within Betsy's body. When the Office of the Medical Investigator completed its post-mortem examination, the official cause of death for Betsy Arakawa was listed as hantavirus pulmonary syndrome. To many, the name sounds like an exotic, distant disease, but in the high-elevation rural environments of the American Southwest, it is a rare but deeply feared reality. Hantavirus is not a disease that passes from human to human. It is carried by wild rodents, specifically the deer mouse, which is common in the dry brush of New Mexico. The virus is shed in the droppings, urine, and saliva of these infected mice. Humans contract the virus when they disturb nested areas and inadvertently breathe in microscopic, airborne dust particles contaminated with the rodent waste. It does not require a direct encounter with a mouse. A simple chore, like sweeping out an old garden shed, cleaning a garage, or retrieving items from an outdoor storage building where mice have nested, can be enough to introduce the lethal pathogen into a person's lungs. An environmental assessment of the Hackman estate later confirmed this exact scenario. While the main house was clean and well kept, investigators discovered extensive signs of rodent activity, including fresh droppings, in several of the detached outbuildings scattered across the property. It was in one of these quiet, dusty spaces that Betsy had likely breathed in the invisible dust, setting off a ticking clock inside her respiratory system. The cruelty of hantavirus lies in its slow, deceptive incubation period. After exposure, a person can feel completely healthy for anywhere from 1 to several weeks. When the first symptoms finally manifest, they are indistinguishable from a common winter flu or a mild bout of COVID-19. Fatigue, muscle aches, a low-grade fever, headaches, and chills are the standard opening signs. This deceptive simplicity was reflected in Betsy's internet search history. In the days leading up to her death, from February 8th through the morning of February 12th, Betsy repeatedly searched for terms relating to flu-like symptoms, respiratory congestion, home remedies for breathing difficulties, and breathing exercises. She was doing what anyone would do, attempting to self-diagnose and manage a condition she assumed was minor and temporary. By the morning of February 12th, however, Betsy realized that her condition was worsening. At approximately 9:30 a.m., she placed a phone call to Cloudberry Health, a local medical concierge service. Because she was not an established patient, she explained her symptoms to the staff, describing a persistent feeling of chest congestion and fatigue. During the call, the physician noted that while she sounded tired, she did not exhibit the desperate breathlessness of someone in immediate, life-threatening distress. When she inquired about hyperbaric oxygen therapy, a treatment she hoped might clear her lungs, the clinic advised her to come in for an in-person evaluation. An appointment was set for 1:15 p.m. that afternoon. She never arrived. The clinic tried to reach her later that day, but their calls went unanswered, slipping silently into a voicemail box that would never be cleared. In the final acute stage of hantavirus, the lungs begin to rapidly fill with fluid, a condition known as pulmonary edema. Once this stage is reached, the body's oxygen levels plummet, and the physical decline is terrifyingly swift. Within a matter of hours, a patient can go from feeling moderately congested to experiencing complete respiratory collapse. The medical investigator noted that in severe cases, the onset of this final phase is so sudden that victims often collapse and die within a day or two of their first major respiratory symptoms. It was this rapid, overwhelming assault that claimed Betsy's life. She was found in a bathroom near the front entryway, surrounded by scattered thyroid pills from an open prescription bottle, evidence that she had perhaps been trying to reach for her routine medication as her body began to fail, or had knocked them over in a final, desperate struggle to find stability as her vision faded. While Betsy's sudden death was a tragedy in its own right, the timeline reconstructed by investigators revealed a second, even more painful chapter that occurred in the days that followed. When deputies first examined Gene Hackman's body, they were desperate for a reliable metric to determine when his life had ended. That answer came from an unexpected source: the pacemaker implanted in his chest. A modern pacemaker does not merely regulate the heart. It acts as a highly sophisticated data logger, recording every heartbeat, every rhythm abnormality, and every adjustment the device makes over time. When forensic technicians extracted the data from Gene's pacemaker, they discovered that the device had recorded continuous, regular cardiac activity up until approximately February 18, 2025. On that day, the log recorded a sudden, severe heart arrhythmia, followed by a permanent cessation of activity. The medical significance of this data was staggering. Gene Hackman had lived for roughly 7 days after his wife had passed away. The implications of those 7 days are deeply haunting. For a full week, a 95-year-old man, weakened by advanced cardiovascular disease and trapped in the fog of severe Alzheimer's, was left entirely alone in a silent house with the body of his lifelong companion. Because his cognitive abilities were severely compromised, his experience of those 7 days is something we can only attempt to piece together through the lenses of neurology and forensic medicine. The chief medical investigator was asked directly if Gene had been aware of his wife's passing. She explained that given the profound level of cognitive impairment revealed during his autopsy, it is highly probable that he lacked the neurological capacity to process, understand, or retain the reality of her death. In the advanced stages of Alzheimer's, the brain's ability to form new memories, connect cause to effect, or initiate complex, multi-step actions is largely destroyed. A person in this state might walk into a room, see their partner lying on the floor, and feel a deep, survival-level wave of anxiety, confusion, or grief, only to forget the image seconds later as their mind drifts back into the haze of the past. The neurological pathways required to translate a sense of danger into a life-saving action, such as picking up a telephone to dial 911, walking out the front door to find a neighbor, or even seeking out food and water, are no longer functional. This tragic reality was borne out by the physical evidence found at the scene. When Gene's body was examined, investigators found that his stomach was completely empty. He had not eaten a meaningful meal in several days. Yet, remarkably, he was not severely dehydrated, suggesting he may have still possessed the instinctual, deeply ingrained habit of drinking water from a tap, even as his ability to feed himself had vanished. Ultimately, his cause of death was ruled as hypertensive and atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, with Alzheimer's disease listed as a significant contributing factor. His heart, already scarred by past silent cardiac events and damaged by years of high blood pressure, simply gave out under the compounding stress of exhaustion, lack of nourishment, and the quiet, terrible confusion of his environment. He was found in the mudroom near the kitchen, a walking cane and a pair of sunglasses lying near his body, suggesting that in his final moments he had been trying to move through his home, perhaps searching for the familiar face that had guided him through the dark for 30 years. The silent tragedy of those 7 days extended beyond the human residents to the animals that shared their home. When deputies completed their sweep of the estate, they found that the couple's 3 dogs had experienced vastly different fates, depending entirely on the physical boundaries of their immediate surroundings. The 2 dogs that had been allowed to roam freely throughout the property survived the ordeal. They had access to a built-in doggy door, which allowed them to move between the interior of the home and the secure outdoor courtyard. This mobility gave them access to natural water sources and the freedom to forage or find safety. When help finally arrived, one of these surviving dogs was found resting quietly near Betsy's body, keeping a silent, weeks-long vigil over the woman who had cared for him. The other was found wandering the outdoor grounds, waiting for a door to open. But Xena, the Kelpie mix, had no such escape. Because she was confined to her recovery crate following her veterinary procedure, she was entirely dependent on human intervention for her survival. As the days stretched into a week, and then into 2, the water in her crate ran dry, and the food never arrived. Xena died of starvation and dehydration, trapped in her enclosure just feet away from where her owners lay. It is a detail that underscores the absolute completeness of the household's collapse, a system so perfectly closed, so insulated from the outside world, that even the most basic cries for help went entirely unheard. The deaths of Gene Hackman and Betsy Arakawa present a profound paradox that resonates far beyond the borders of their Santa Fe estate. In the modern hyper-connected world, we often operate under the assumption that wealth, fame, and high-tech security gates are the ultimate safeguards against tragedy. We believe that a life surrounded by beautiful art, situated within a prestigious, gated community, is insulated from the harsh vulnerabilities that affect the less fortunate. Yet, this tragedy demonstrates that the very structures we build to protect our privacy can, under the right circumstances, become the very walls that seal our fate. For 20 years, Gene Hackman's desire for anonymity was respected by a grateful public and a protective community. Neighbors did not pry, delivery drivers left packages at the gate, and the world allowed a legendary figure to grow old in peace. This respect for their solitude was a rare gift, allowing them to live on their own terms. But when illness struck, that same solitude became an impenetrable barrier. Because there were no routine visitors, no live-in caretakers, and no digital windows into their daily lives, their silence was interpreted not as an emergency, but as the continuation of the quiet life they had so carefully chosen. Ultimately, the story of their final days is not one of violence, malice, or systemic failure, but of a quiet, devastating collision of nature, aging, and love. It is a reminder of the fragility of the structures we rely upon, and the profound, silent weight of caregiving. Betsy died while trying to protect her family. Gene died because the mind and body that had once commanded the silver screen could no longer navigate the physical reality of a world without her. As the investigation closed and the estate fell silent once more, what remained was not a mystery to be solved, but a quiet, solemn monument to a couple who chose to live together in total privacy, and who, in the end, were reclaimed by the quiet desert they loved so much.